The sound of dirt hitting my father's casket should have been the worst thing I heard today. It wasn't. That honor belongs to my husband's whispered ultimatum, delivered between clenched teeth while he gripped my elbow too tight. Either we move in with my parents, or I'm filing for divorce. I'm Willow, and this is how my marriage died on the same day we buried my father. The funeral crowd had thinned to just family now, if you could call Jake's parents that anymore. Martha stood across the grave, her vulture-like stare boring into me while Henry hovered at her shoulder like a shadow. They'd been circling closer all afternoon, probably rehearsing their practice speeches about family duty and doing what's best. "You're hurting me," I said, trying to pull away from Jake's grip. He loosened his hold but didn't let go. "This isn't a negotiation, Willow. Dad's retiring next month. They need us. My father's body isn't even cold." "Exactly. You're emotional. You're not thinking clearly about what's best for everyone." I stared at the fresh dirt, fighting the urge to laugh. Or scream. Or both. What's best for everyone? Or what's best for your mother? Don't start with that again. Jake's voice carried that familiar warning tone, the one that usually made me back down. Mom and Dad have given us everything. The least we can do is help them transition into retirement. Samuel, my father's oldest friend, approached slowly from the cemetery path. His presence was like a lifeline, and Jake's grip finally fell away. Martha's eyes narrowed at the interruption. "Willow, dear," Samuel said, his weathered face creased with genuine concern. "Your father would have wanted you to take some time. Process things." "We're family," Martha cut in, gliding forward. "We'll help her process. Won't we, Jake?" I watched my husband nod, the same way he always did when his mother spoke. 15 years of marriage, and I'd never seen him refuse her anything. The weight of my father's estate papers felt heavy in my purse, papers Jake didn't know about yet. Papers that would change everything. "I need to go," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "I have things to arrange at the house." "Our house," Jake corrected. "And it's too big for one person. Mom and Dad's place makes more sense." I said I need to go. Samuel touched my shoulder. "I'll drive you." "She's fine," Jake snapped. "I'll take my wife home." "Actually," I said, "I'm not fine. And I'm not going anywhere with you right now." Martha gasped, perfectly timed for maximum dramatic effect. "Jake, darling, you see how she's acting? This is exactly why she needs us." I turned away, Samuel falling into step beside me. Behind us, I could hear Martha's voice rising. Could practically see Jake's face reddening with that specific shade of embarrassment his mother always managed to produce. "You can't just walk away from family," Martha called after me. But I could. I was. The truth hit me halfway to Samuel's car. I'd been walking away from myself for 15 years, one small step at a time. Letting Jake's family reshape me into their idea of a proper wife. Watching my own dreams fade like old photographs. Not anymore. Samuel opened the car door, and I slid inside, my hands shaking as I buckled the seatbelt. Through the windshield, I could see Jake and his parents huddled together, 3 heads bent in conversation. Planning their next move, no doubt. Let them plan. They didn't know about the recordings yet. Or the letters. Or the truth about what my father had discovered before he died. They had no idea what was coming. Samuel's car pulled up to my father's estate, my estate now, just as the sun was setting. The old Victorian shadow stretched across the lawn like a warning. Jake's Mercedes already sat in the driveway, a sleek reminder that I couldn't avoid what was coming. You don't have to go in alone, Samuel said, his hand still gripping the steering wheel. Actually, I do. I gathered my purse, feeling the weight of the estate papers inside. But thank you. For everything. The front door opened before I reached it. Jake stood there, jacket off, sleeves rolled up like he was ready for battle. Behind him, I could hear Martha's voice floating from the kitchen, probably already reorganizing my cabinets. Nice of you to finally join us, Jake said, stepping aside to let me pass. Mom's making dinner. In my kitchen. Our kitchen, Willow. And she's trying to help. I moved past him, the familiar scent of Martha's signature pot roast hitting me like a slap. She'd cooked the same meal for every major event in our married life, birthdays, anniversaries, the day Jake made partner at his firm. Now here it was again, on the day we buried my father. There you are. Martha's voice carried that artificial brightness she reserved for public performances. She stood at my counter, wearing an apron I'd never seen before, probably brought from her own house. Henry, look who finally made it home. My father-in-law barely glanced up from his phone, mumbling something that might have been a greeting. I'm not hungry, I said, heading for the stairs. Jake caught my arm. Mom went to all this trouble. Let her go, darling, Martha cut in, her knife clicking against the cutting board. She's grieving. Though I do wish she'd consider how her behavior affects others. I jerked away from Jake's grip, taking the stairs two at a time. Behind me, I heard Martha's stage whisper, "You see what I mean? This is exactly why she needs us here." My father's study door was ajar. I pushed it open, expecting the familiar comfort of his space. Instead, I froze. The room had been ransacked. Drawers hung open, papers scattered across the desk. The painting behind his chair, the one he'd always joked contained his secrets, hung crooked on the wall. My hands shook as I straightened it, revealing the wall safe behind. Still locked. Thank God. Looking for something specific? I spun around. Jake stood in the doorway, his face unreadable. What did you do? Me? He stepped inside, closing the door. I was looking for the will. Since you ran off with Samuel instead of discussing things like an adult. The will is with the lawyers. You know that. Do I? You've been awfully secretive lately. He moved closer, and I caught a whiff of scotch on his breath. Just like your father was, at the end. A chill ran through me. What's that supposed to mean? It means, Jake said, his voice dropping, that I know he changed his will 3 weeks ago. Right after our last dinner together. Right after Martha and I told him about our plans for developing this property. The pieces clicked into place. The tension at that dinner. My father's sudden insistence on updating his estate planning. The way Jake and Martha had been hovering ever since, watching Dad like hawks. You were planning this before he even died? Planning what? To take care of family? To make something of this oversized monument to your father's ego? Jake ran a hand through his hair, a gesture I once found endearing. Your father was sick, Willow. He wasn't thinking clearly. Footsteps creaked on the stairs, followed by Martha's voice, everything all right up there? Fine, Mom, Jake called back, his eyes never leaving mine. Willow's just having a moment. I moved toward the door, but he blocked my path. We're not done here. Actually, I said, I think we are. On several levels. His laugh was ugly. You really want to do this? Fight me over a house and some land? Because I promise you, Willow, you won't win. I thought of the recordings in my purse. The letters. The truth about what Jake and his family had been planning all along. "We'll see about that," I said, pushing past him into the hallway. Martha stood at the top of the stairs, concern painted perfectly across her face. "Dinner's ready, dears. Why don't we all sit down and talk about this like family?" Family. The word had never sounded more like a threat. The blueprints spread across Samuel's kitchen table might as well have been a death sentence for my father's estate. Architectural drawings showed modern buildings sprawling across the land, cutting through gardens my father had tended for 30 years. The date in the corner, 3 months ago, burned into my vision. "Jake had these drawn up before Dad even got sick," I said, my fingers tracing the sharp lines that would destroy everything my father built. "Look at his signature here. And Martha's company logo." Samuel placed a steaming mug of coffee beside me. "There's more." He slid a folder across the table. Inside, I found emails between Jake and various developers, all dated weeks before my father's death. The language was careful, coded, but the intent was clear. They'd been planning to transform the estate into a luxury family compound, complete with separate wings for Jake's parents. They were just waiting for him to die. "Not exactly," Samuel said, pulling out another document. "They were waiting for him to sign this." The paper trembled in my hands as I read. "A transfer of power of attorney, drafted but never signed." My father's signature line sat empty at the bottom, a small victory from beyond the grave. My phone buzzed, another message from Jake. I'd left the house last night after refusing to join their family dinner, and he'd been alternating between threats and pleading ever since. "You should read this one," Samuel said, holding up a final email. "It's from Martha to the developers, dated 2 weeks before your father's death." The words blurred through tears of rage. "Once we secure power of attorney, we can proceed regardless of Willow's objections. Jake assures me she'll fall in line or face consequences." A key turned in Samuel's front door. I scrambled to gather the papers, but Samuel held up a hand. "I invited someone." Henry stepped into the kitchen, looking smaller somehow without Martha hovering nearby. His eyes fell on the blueprints. "So you found them," he said. "Did you know?" I demanded. "The whole time, did you know what they were planning?" He sank into a chair, suddenly every bit his 62 years. "Martha said it was for the best. That we'd all be together, like a real family should be. By destroying my father's home? Your father." Henry's laugh was bitter. "Do you know what Martha called him? The obstacle." Every night, planning and plotting, while I sat there watching my wife and son turn into people I didn't recognize. My phone buzzed again. Jake's message flashed across the screen. "Mom's lawyers are ready. Don't make this harder than it needs to be." "They're meeting with contractors today," Henry said, pulling out his own phone. "Martha thinks she's won already. She's picking out paint colors for her wing of the house." I stood up so fast my chair toppled backward. "They can't. The property isn't even." "They don't care," Henry cut in. "They never have. It's always been about control. Martha's control. And Jake." He shook his head. "Jake never learned to say no to her." Samuel touched my arm. "Show him." I pulled out my father's last letter from my purse, the one I'd found in the safe after Jake's failed search. Henry read it slowly, his face growing paler with each line. "Your father knew," he whispered. "All this time, he knew what they were planning. And he left me everything I need to stop them." I gathered the blueprints and emails. "The question is, Henry, whose side are you really on?" He stared at his hands for a long moment. When he looked up, Something had shifted in his eyes. "Martha's at the estate now," he said. "She's meeting the contractors at noon. She thinks." He swallowed hard. "She thinks she's finally winning." "She's not," I said, checking my watch. "Because in exactly 45 minutes, I'm going to show her what losing really looks like." Samuel picked up his car keys. "I'll drive." Henry stood, straightening his shoulders. "I'm coming too." It's time someone stood up to Martha. Even if it has to be me. My phone buzzed one final time. Jake's message was just one line: "Last chance, Willow. Don't do anything you'll regret." But as we headed for Samuel's car, regret was the last thing on my mind. They wanted a war over my father's legacy? Fine. I'd give them one they'd never forget. Martha's face turned ashen when we walked into the estate's garden. She stood among a cluster of contractors, architectural plans spread across a portable table. Her perfectly manicured finger frozen midpoint on the paper. Jake's expression shifted from confusion to rage as Henry stepped out from behind me. "What is he doing here?" Martha's voice could have frozen hell. "Telling the truth, for once," Henry said. The contractors shifted uncomfortably as I approached the table. One of them, older, with kind eyes, glanced between the blueprints and my face. "Mrs. Davidson, I wasn't aware this was a contested development." "It's not contested," Jake cut in, moving to stand beside his mother. "My wife is just emotional right now. Her father's passing." "Her father's murder, you mean?" Samuel's quiet words dropped like bombs in the garden. Martha's clipboard clattered to the ground. Jake went still. "What did you say?" His voice was dangerous, low. "I pulled out my father's last letter, along with the medical reports we'd found hidden in his safe. Dad knew about the development plans. He also knew about the sleeping pills Martha had been slipping into his evening tea. Convenient timing, wasn't it? His sudden decline just when you needed him to sign over power of attorney? That's ridiculous," Martha snapped, but her hands were shaking. "Henry, tell them how ridiculous this is." "I found the pills in your purse, Martha." Henry's voice cracked. 3 days before he died. I told myself I was imagining things. That you wouldn't. That our son wouldn't. The contractors were already packing up, murmuring apologies and quick exits. The older one paused beside me, pressing his card into my hand. "Call us when this is sorted, Mrs. Davidson." Legally sorted. Jake grabbed my arm as I tried to follow them. "You're making a mistake. The mistake was thinking you ever loved me more than your mother's approval." I jerked away from him. "The police are already reviewing the evidence. They're very interested in Martha's monthly prescriptions for sleeping medication. And the timing of your development plans. You wouldn't dare." Martha's perfect facade cracked. "After everything we've done for you." "Done for me?" The laugh that escaped me didn't sound like my own. "You mean like systematically isolating me from my friends? Criticizing every decision I made? Planning to destroy my father's legacy while he was still alive?" "We were trying to help," Jake insisted, but his eyes darted to the medical reports in my hand. "Mom just wanted what was best for everyone." "Best for everyone?" Henry's voice rose. "Our son is facing possible conspiracy charges because you couldn't wait a few more months for a legal inheritance? Because you had to control everything, everyone, all the time?" Martha turned on him, teeth bared. "Don't you dare turn on me now. Everything I did for this family." "No." I held up my phone, recording app running. Everything you did for yourself. And now everyone's going to know exactly what kind of person you are. Jake lunged for the phone, but Samuel stepped between us. In the distance, sirens wailed. "That'll be Detective Morris," Samuel said quietly. "He's very interested in speaking with all of you." Martha's composure shattered completely. "Jake, do something." But Jake just stood there, looking lost, like a puppet whose strings had been cut. For the first time, I saw him clearly, not as my husband or Martha's son, but as a hollow man who'd never had the courage to be himself. "It's over," I said, watching police cars turn into the driveway. "The estate stays as it is. And you all get to explain to the police exactly why my father died 3 days before your development plans were set to begin." "You'll regret this," Martha hissed, but her eyes were wild with fear. I thought of my father's last days, of the confusion in his eyes that we'd all dismissed as natural decline. Of the team Martha insisted on preparing herself. Of Jake's convenient business trips that kept him away from witnessing his mother's frequent visits. "No," I said, watching Detective Morris approach with his officers. "I don't think I will." The handcuffs clicked shut around Martha's wrists, and somewhere in the garden, a bird began to sing. Detective Morris's words echoed through the estate's empty living room. "Martha made bail an hour ago." I gripped the armchair, knuckles white. Through the window, I could see Henry pacing the garden, phone pressed to his ear. He hadn't spoken to Martha since her arrest 3 days ago. "What about Jake?" My voice sounded distant, even to myself. "Still in custody." Morris flipped through his notes. "But his lawyer's good. Very good. They're already spinning a story about him being manipulated by his mother, claiming he had no knowledge of the sleeping pills." Samuel set a glass of water in front of me, but I couldn't bring myself to drink. He knew. He had to know. Proving it is another matter. Morris leaned forward. "We need more than circumstantial evidence. Something concrete linking him directly to your father's death." My phone buzzed, another text from an unknown number. I'd been getting them since Martha's arrest, each one more threatening than the last. This one made my blood freeze. "Check the greenhouse." "Willow?" Samuel touched my shoulder. "What is it?" I was already moving, Morris and Samuel following as I rushed across the lawn. The greenhouse had been my father's sanctuary, filled with rare orchids he'd spent decades cultivating. The door hung slightly ajar. Inside, devastation greeted us. Every plant had been methodically destroyed, orchid stems snapped, pots shattered. On my father's workbench lay a single teacup, identical to the ones Martha had used. "Don't touch anything," Morris barked, pulling out his phone. But my eyes caught something else, a flash of white beneath the broken pottery. I pointed, and Morris carefully extracted a stack of papers. Bank statements. Emails. A second will, dated before the one we'd found in the safe. "These are fake," Samuel said, examining them. "They're trying to create a paper trail showing your father intended to sell the estate." "Martha's handwriting," I said, recognizing the forged signatures. "But the plan. This is all Jake. This is how he thinks." Henry appeared in the doorway, face ashen. "Martha's gone. Her phone's disconnected, and she cleared out our accounts this morning." A crash from the house made us all jump. We rushed back, Morris drawing his weapon. The front door stood wide open. Inside, Jake stood in my father's study, hands raised as 2 officers trained their weapons on him. At his feet lay the open safe, empty. "Looking for these?" I held up the stack of evidence from the greenhouse. His eyes narrowed. "You don't understand what you're doing." I understand perfectly. You and Martha thought you could forge documents showing Dad wanted to sell. Plant them in the greenhouse, make it look like he'd hidden them. Then discover them after destroying the real evidence. She's lying, Jake said to Morris. Everything in that safe proved Willow's been manipulating the situation. My mother was trying to protect our family's interests. By killing my father? By doing what needed to be done. Jake's composure cracked. You never appreciated what we were trying to build. A legacy. A real family. Not this mausoleum to your father's ego. Henry stepped forward. Where is she, Jake? Where did your mother go? Why? So you can betray her again? Jake's laugh was ugly. You're as weak as Willow's father was. At least Mom had the courage to take action. My phone buzzed again. Another unknown number, but this time with an image, Martha, sitting in what looked like an airport lounge, holding today's newspaper. The text below, last chance. Sign over the estate, or the real evidence about your father's death goes public. She's bluffing, Samuel said, reading over my shoulder. But Jake's smile told a different story. Are you sure about that? Mom kept very detailed records of her visits with your father. Every cup of tea, every conversation. Would you like the world to know how long he suffered before the end? How many times he begged for help while you were too busy to notice? The room spun. Morris was saying something about tracking Martha's phone, Henry was shouting at Jake, but all I could hear was my father's voice from his last days. Something's wrong, Willow. Something's not right. I'd dismissed it as confusion. We all had. Jake's smile widened as he watched me process this. Tick-tock, Willow. How much of Dad's legacy are you willing to destroy to protect your own? Martha's evidence arrived in a plain manila envelope, delivered to the estate by courier. Inside, I found photos, handwritten notes, and a USB drive that documented every step of my father's decline. The final photo showed him in his study, cup of tea in hand, dated the day before he died. The look in his eyes, confusion, fear, betrayal, made my knees buckle. You can't trust these, Samuel said, but his voice lacked conviction. They could be manipulated. Detective Morris examined the USB drive. The metadata's intact. These are original, unaltered files. Jake sat across the room, still in handcuffs but wearing that familiar smirk. Mom always was thorough. Especially when it came to protecting the family. Protecting the family? Henry's voice cracked. She killed a man, Jake. Your wife's father. She eliminated an obstacle. Jake leaned forward. Just like Willow's become an obstacle. But there's still time to fix this. Sign over the estate, and everything goes away. The evidence, the investigation, all of it. Morris's phone buzzed. He stepped away to take the call, then returned looking grim. Martha's been spotted boarding a private plane to a non-extradition country. We're trying to ground it, but... Too late, Jake said. She's probably already in international airspace. Tick-tock, Willow. Once she releases those files to the media, your father's legacy becomes a scandal. Every newspaper, every TV station will run stories about the confused old man who died under suspicious circumstances while his daughter was too busy to notice. My hands shook as I lifted another photo from the envelope. Dad in his garden, looking lost among his beloved orchids. Martha's handwriting on the back, day 47, increased dosage. Subject showing signs of severe confusion. Subject, I whispered. She documented his murder like a science experiment. She documented your negligence, Jake corrected. The devoted mother-in-law who tried to warn you something was wrong. Who stepped in to care for him while you focused on your career. The grieving widow who noticed his decline but couldn't convince his daughter to pay attention. Samuel grabbed my arm as I lurched toward Jake. He's baiting you. The papers are ready, Jake continued. One signature and this all disappears. Mom releases a statement about a misunderstanding, returns to help manage the estate development. Your father's reputation stays intact. Everyone wins. Everyone except Dad. He's dead, Willow. But you're not. Think about your future. About the scandal this will cause. About how people will look at you, wondering if you knew all along what was happening to him. Morris cleared his throat. The planes cleared U.S. airspace. We've notified Interpol, but nothing will stick, Jake finished. Not without creating a media circus that destroys everything your father built. Is that what you want? To turn his legacy into a true crime podcast? I looked around the study, at the books Dad loved, the photos of us together, the garden visible through the window. Everything he'd built, everything he'd loved, tainted by Martha's methodical documentation of his murder. Time's running out, Jake said softly. Mom's given you 1 hour to decide. After that, the files go public. Every detail, every photo, every moment of his suffering. Is your revenge worth destroying his memory? Henry stepped forward. There has to be another way. There isn't. Jake's smile was triumphant. Mom made sure of that. She always does. My phone buzzed, another message from Martha. A video this time, showing Dad in his final days, confused and afraid, calling out for me while Martha's voice soothed him with promises to help. I'll need to see the papers, I said quietly. Willow, no, Samuel protested. But I was already reaching for the document Jake's lawyer had delivered. The estate transfer agreement that would give them everything they wanted. Everything they'd killed for. Smart girl, Jake said. I knew you'd make the right choice. I lifted the pen, feeling its weight like a coffin nail. In the garden, the last of Dad's orchids swayed in the breeze, survivors of Martha's destruction. Soon they'd be gone too, replaced by whatever monument to greed Jake and his mother planned to build. Just sign, Jake urged. End this nightmare. The pen hovered over the signature line as Martha's final text arrived, time's up. Choose wisely. The pen never touched the paper. Instead, I reached for my father's favorite teacup, the one still sitting on his desk, the one Martha had used for her final dose. What are you doing? Jake's smirk faltered. Something Dad taught me. I lifted the cup, examining its delicate pattern. About orchids. About patience. About hidden things. Samuel stepped closer, realization dawning on his face. I caught his eye, saw him reach slowly for his phone. Enough games, Jake snapped. Sign the papers, or Mom releases everything. You mean like this? I turned the cup over, revealing the tiny camera lens embedded in its base. Dad wasn't as confused as you thought. He knew something was wrong, so he started watching. Recording. The color drained from Jake's face. You're lying. The cameras were everywhere. In his teacups, his books, even the orchid pot Martha destroyed yesterday. I nodded to Morris, who was already typing on his phone. Every conversation, every cup of tea, every secret meeting about development plans. All streaming to a secure server. Impossible, Jake whispered, but his eyes darted to the cup, then to his handcuffs. Your mother was thorough, Jake. But Dad was thorough too. I placed the cup back on the desk. He knew you were planning something. He just didn't expect his own family to kill him for it. Martha's voice suddenly filled the room from Morris's phone, streaming the server's contents. Just drink your tea, Richard. Jake and I have everything under control. Jake lunged forward, despite his restraints. Turn it off. Can't do that, Morris said, nodding to his officers. This is evidence now. All of it. You don't understand, Jake's voice cracked. Mom will release everything. The photos, the videos. Let her. I stepped closer, close enough to see the fear replacing his arrogance. Let the world see what she documented. What you helped cover up. Every file she releases will match perfectly with Dad's recordings, except to show the whole truth. Samuel's phone buzzed. Martha's plane just turned around. Interpol's orders. That's impossible, Jake said. She has diplomatic immunity. Had, Henry cut in, holding up his own phone. I just spoke with our family lawyer. Seems Martha's immunity was tied to my position on the diplomatic corps. The position I resigned from 10 minutes ago. Jake slumped in his chair. Dad, you can't. Can't what? Stand by while your mother faces justice? Like I did when she killed Richard? Henry's voice shook. I've done enough standing by. My phone lit up with a message from Martha, the last one she'd ever send me. You'll regret this. I typed back 3 words, watch the tea. The officers led Jake away as Morris played more recordings. Martha's voice filled the room again, documenting her crimes in perfect detail, while Dad's hidden cameras captured every moment, every confession. Every calculated move. The orchids, Samuel said softly. He hid cameras in the orchids she destroyed yesterday. She thought she was destroying evidence, I replied. She was actually preserving it. Every broken pot released another memory card. Your father, Henry's voice cracked. He knew? He suspected. That's why he changed his will, why he left everything in trust. I picked up the estate transfer papers, tearing them slowly in half. He made sure Martha and Jake could never touch it, no matter what happened to him. Morris ended the playback. We'll need your testimony. You'll have it. Every detail. I looked around the study, at the home Martha had tried to steal, at the legacy she tried to destroy. Let her release her evidence. Let everyone see exactly what kind of person she is. Samuel touched my shoulder. Richard would be proud. No, I said, watching Jake's police escort disappear down the driveway. He'd be heartbroken. But he'd understand. In the garden, through the study window, I could see the surviving orchids swaying in the breeze. Dad's final witnesses, keeping their secrets safe until the moment of truth. Just like he taught me. The verdict came down like thunder in the quiet courtroom. Martha's face remained stone still as the judge read out her sentence, but her hands trembled, rattling her handcuffs. Jake wouldn't look at me, wouldn't look at anyone. His earlier bravado dissolved into something smaller, more fragile. Henry sat beside me, shoulders bowed but steady. He testified against them both, his quiet voice carrying more weight than Martha's theatrical protests or Jake's rehearsed excuses. Outside, reporters waited with their questions about justice and closure, about healing and moving forward. They didn't understand. Some wounds don't heal, they just become part of who you are. Back at the estate, I found Samuel in the greenhouse, carefully tending the surviving orchids. New growth had emerged from the broken stems, tiny green shoots reaching toward the light. "Your father's last letter," he said, holding out a weathered envelope. "He asked me to wait until after the trial." The paper felt warm, alive somehow. Inside, I found a single page covered in Dad's familiar scrawl. "My dearest Willow. If you're reading this, then the worst has happened, and you've discovered the truth about Martha and Jake. I'm sorry for the burden I've placed on you, for the choice I made in documenting everything instead of confronting them directly. But I knew they'd never stop, never be satisfied until they'd taken everything. The cameras weren't just about gathering evidence. They were about teaching you one last lesson, that truth, like the orchids we loved, requires patience, careful tending, and the courage to wait for the right moment to bloom. I've left you more than just the estate. I've left you the strength I always saw in you, even when you couldn't see it yourself. The strength to stand alone, to face hard truths, to protect what matters most." In the greenhouse, behind the broken pottery and Martha's destruction, you'll find something I've been working on. A new hybrid orchid, years in the development. I've named it Willow's Justice, because like you, it thrives not in spite of adversity, but because of it. Plant it. Watch it grow. Let it remind you that even in our darkest moments, beauty finds a way. All my love. Dad. Samuel touched my shoulder. "There's something else you should see." He led me to the back of the greenhouse, where a single pot sat hidden behind the wreckage. Inside, a stunning orchid bloomed, petals white as truth, streaked with veins of deep purple like justice finally served. He finished it just before. Samuel's voice trailed off. "The genetics are completely unique. It's officially registered with the Royal Horticultural Society. Your father's final legacy, and yours." My phone buzzed, a message from Detective Morris. Martha's private plane had been seized, her offshore accounts frozen. Jake's law firm had stripped his name from their partnership. Their carefully constructed world was crumbling, one piece at a time. I switched off the phone. "Help me clean up this mess?" I asked Samuel, gesturing to the broken pots and scattered soil. He smiled, understanding what I wasn't saying. Sometimes healing starts with simple things: dirt under your fingernails, broken things made whole, new life emerging from decay. We worked in comfortable silence, clearing debris and salvaging what we could. Henry joined us later, his diplomatic polish replaced by workman's gloves and determination. Together, we rebuilt what Martha had tried to destroy, making space for something new to grow. As the sun set, I placed Willow's Justice in the center of the greenhouse. Its petals caught the fading light, transforming it into something almost otherworldly, beautiful and resilient, like truth finally set free. Dad was right. Some things require patience, careful tending, the courage to wait. And some things, like justice and orchids and healing, bloom in their own time, in their own way. I touched a perfect white petal, feeling its strength beneath the delicate surface. Tomorrow would bring more questions, more reporters, more pieces to pick up. But tonight, in this greenhouse my father loved, surrounded by broken things growing whole again, I finally understood what he'd known all along. The most powerful legacy isn't in what we leave behind, but in what we help others become strong enough to grow for themselves.